Hello and welcome to a new video. I'm going to be talking about the upcoming Succubus game by Madmind Studio. They are in fact making a new game set in Agony's world, this time featuring the Succubus, because that's the mode from the original Agony everyone enjoyed the most. So it makes sense. Unlike the original Agony, this game is more fast-paced looking and heavily is focused on combat rather than hiding away from all your enemies. Earlier today they released a concept gameplay trailer, which I think means that nothing concerning the game has really been finalized or made yet. This is a custom video to show what you should expect the gameplay to be like. And if that's the case, then there are a few things that I hope the developers keep in mind when developing the game, so it has a better release than Agony did. The first and foremost thing is movement. Since this is going to be a faster paced game than Agony from the looks of it, and you're going to be sliding under enemies and running around and slashing them, it's really important to make sure that the game is fun to play and run around in. Having decent maneuverability will help with these close quarters combats, especially since it seems like there's only going to be melee weapons, as opposed to something with range like the guns from Scorn. And this is especially important since movement was a problem I had with the first Agony that couldn't be patched, and I'm assuming this game is going to be built more from the ground up. Games like Doom, for example, though more focused on ranged combat than melee combat, show how I think a fast-paced, brutal sort of game should be. You're able to move rapidly, you're able to change directions well, jumping is satisfying, strafing is intuitive, I would say. You're not going to make the slightest miscalculation during a jump and fall into a death pit. And another thing to consider is environmental geometry. Doom has it easy since all of the areas, or at least most of them, are these geometric corridors or wide open rooms. Meanwhile, Agony's hell is more organic, both figuratively and literally. There's rocky environments with short and high elevations, and it may look great, but also lends itself a lot of opportunities to end up getting stuck on the level's geometry. The last thing you want to do when you're trying to fight an opponent is get stuck on a wall or an ankle-high elevation on the floor that you couldn't see coming. Given that the new game seems to be so focused on movement and expanding upon the different ways the Succubus can move around, I do hope they make sure that the levels are fun to move in. It's not just ripping and tearing your enemies in the new Doom that's fun, it's hopping around the various facilities and hellscapes while doing so. The game is overall linear, but when you are fighting enemies, there is ample room to move around and pick your directions. Do you want to go from above, below? What corridors do you want to take to sneak up on them and shoot them from behind or face them head on? Something as simple as a double jump, for example, can make the game so much more fun to play because of all the new areas you're able to access and the new dodging and striking you're able to commit to. Like in TF2, where the scout is the most nimble and maneuverable of the classes, and he's able to handle stronger opponents even in a one-to-one head-on melee fight. And with maneuverability comes the ability to add in more enemies. Games like Doom, for example, can have 6 or 7 enemies at once, while something like Scorn, where you're far more limited in your movement and are significantly slower, can only really have 2 or 3 at most. No matter how many enemies there are in the game, whether 8 or just 1, care must also be taken to avoid the gameplay seeming monotonous or boring after a while. This doesn't mean that every enemy needs to be a one-hit kill, just that the sort of gameplay mechanics that are available are fun enough to keep you wanting to use them more, and the environment's interesting enough and diverse enough in what you can do in them, so that it doesn't seem like you're doing the same thing in the same place over and over and over again. Having a decent selection of weapons, which the game seems to advertise itself as having so, is a good way to ensure that things stay interesting. If they're fun to use, they offer some pretty decent change in gameplay and make things a lot more interesting than run up to an enemy and press a single button to instant kill, then come up with whatever ideas you can think of. Go wild. And when gameplay is satisfying and the level design lends itself to making that gameplay all the more fun, then one thing to consider is where you are and how the areas look. One of the big complaints about the original Agony was that a lot of it was too dark, which I would agree, but I don't think that is going to be an issue in the upcoming game. What I do hope is that they have some newer, maybe interesting different takes on hell that we haven't seen before. The trailer shown so far seems to be a mix between the forest area as well as some of the fleshy areas from the first game. The first game also had ice worlds, it had ruins of ancient human temples and buildings, it had cavernous areas. There was some interesting variety in the location, and while I don't think all of them were very visually pleasing, levels like the fractal forest that were a bit of an eyesore being a primary example, it is the first time there has been a game that is centered in hell this exclusively and went so all out with the visuals, and I do hope they continue that and try to expand it in new and interesting directions. For example, since in the Succubus trailer it looks like the people have been crafting their own weapons and trying to fight back against the demons, maybe there'd be an area with some very simple scrapped together huts and houses that the people have managed to live in and fortify. There's even something sort of like that on the walls here in the Succubus trailer. Or maybe there'd be an area really high up and there'd be a part where you have to jump from one of the giant flying hell whales to another to reach the other side. There's just a lot you can do with this aesthetic and location, and I do hope that they make the most of it like they tried to do with the first iteration of Agony and Agony Unrated. I'm assuming that this will be done as a given, but I do hope the game also expands upon the lore of Agony and its universe. We've learned a little bit about the dynamics of hell and how the Red Goddess came in and essentially stole it from Satan. And the description of Succubus says that the Succubus is going to be working with Baphomet. That's this guy. He was one of the boss fights. In order to reclaim hell for the Dark Lord, who is essentially Satan, who we haven't actually seen in Agony yet. The giant creature from the end of the first game is, contrary to popular belief, not Satan. And this next part is more a personal desire rather than like an objective need for the game. But I do hope that we do find some interesting characters in the game, even if we only meet them briefly. Since the first game, one of its endings have shown that it's now the modern times. Nimrod came back to life and saw the end times, and it's apparently like today. That would mean that a lot of people have died and gone to hell within that span of time, from the biblical era to the modern era. It's unlikely that there will be any dialogue in the game. You can talk to people as Nimrod and they'd have a few things to say, but not as a succubus. Nonetheless, given the fact that we do know a lot of time has passed, I do hope we see some interesting, if not significant people. After all, Nimrod was a mad ruler and a great hunter in life. Wouldn't any other great ruler in life find themselves in hell and want to try to make a name for themselves or figure out a way to survive? Wouldn't there be people of all these different religions that have cropped up since a biblical time, having to come to grips with the fact that they were wrong or wonder why God is punishing them so, or people without any religion at all, just utterly awestruck at how wrong they are, and now trying to figure out what to do? Wouldn't there be some great minds in life who have found themselves in hell and are trying to study the demons and figure out better ways to fight them? It doesn't have to be an expansive dialogue system or anything, just maybe a few voice lines here and there from specific NPCs you might come across. Just something to consider. So I hope you all enjoyed the video, that gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you, and I hope Succubus ends up being a good game whenever it comes out. I do hope they give it substantial development time in order to really make sure everything works. And so until any new information comes out, I'll just be waiting. Take care.